that on a continuum. And there's certainly not, and another fallacy that comes out of that is this third way thing, the idea that the central point between two opposite points of view must be the truth. So that's that twisted Hegelian idea of, there's a synthesis between opposites, and that's the right place to stand. And you see it in politics all the time, people claiming a centrist point of view that must be good. Both sides hate me, so I must be right. It's like, no, bros. That doesn't make you right. A proper argument makes you right. A proper set of relationships in the world that's informing your decision making, and that you're doing with other people, that would make you right. But yeah, just existing between two opposite points of view doesn't make you right. And it's another fallacy right there. Yeah. Beautiful. So if you're trying to escape non-duality, if you're trying to escape duality, by assuming that non-duality is the point in between the dualisms, then no, that's you are right deep in the anus of duality there.
Welcome to the Sounds of Sand podcast. Today, Sand co-founder Zaya and Maurizio Benazzo host a conversation with Aboriginal scholar and writer Tyson Yunkaporta for a Sand community gathering. All today on the Sounds of Sand podcast presented by Science and Nonduality.
Welcome to Science and Nonduality. What is non-duality?
The universal forces.
It's the collective consciousness.
Being aware. Trauma is not the external event that happens. Trauma is the impact of that event, which is the disconnection from ourselves.
That matter is energy, energy is matter. That's what EMC squared is about.
There's a language without nouns. There is a language without subjugation. There's a language without objectifying.
But if it's recorded, then there is a collapse. But if it's not, then it's the infinite potentiality.
So, my name is Maurizio Benazzo.
My name is Zaya.
We live in the unceded territory of the coastal Miwok and southern Pomo in what's now called North California, Sebastopol. And we co-founded SAND 15 years ago. And that's enough about us, I would say.
Yes.
Welcome, everybody.
Everyone, yeah.
Should we introduce
Tyson
and we go straight into it? Tyson, we're going to read a formal bio of yours.
Short one.
Short, promise. Tyson Yunkaporta is an academic, an arts critic, and a researcher who is a member of the Apalech Clan in far north Queensland. He carves traditional tools and weapons and also works as a senior lecturer in Indigenous Knowledge at Deakin University in Melbourne. He lives in Melbourne, in Australia. Tyson, welcome. It's such a joy and an honor to have you with us. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, and we might prompt a few questions and then invite anyone to come with your comments or sharing whatever is in your heart. Everything is welcome. So that's the flow we're going to go with. Tyson, yeah.
Well, that's good flows. That's good flows. I just let you know I'm tuning in from Bunurong country, near Antarctica, at the bottom of Australia, at Melbourne. Yeah,
Melbourne.
Nice.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. And originally, your land is Queensland, right? Or
and South Australia too when I was younger, but I finished up in Cape York, and I've spent my life all over the place, as so many of us do. Most Aboriginal people, we're not sedentary, staying like in one spot. It's you tend to go where the work is, or where the funerals are, or where the relationships are, and so people tend to be fairly itinerant, move around quite a bit, so not unusual. So I picked up stories from all over and got good relationships all over this continent.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, I was wondering if you want to share something, because you walk these two seemingly different worlds, right? The academia, the research world, and then you rooted, and I don't know to what extent, in your Aboriginal, Indigenous traditions and stories. How do you walk these two different worlds? How do you navigate? And do they ever converge or meet in any way?
You just shuffle through the colony. I'm like, a savage sort of beast slouching towards Jerusalem or something. Yeah, it's tricky. There's no place that's just Aboriginal. The colony is always there. There's nowhere out in the bush that doesn't have some kind of, that isn't, we don't have any places that are just ours. There's places that are under native title, but that's usually fairly nominal native title. So it's, has other legal status as well. It's really tricky. And there's no way, speaking of non-duality, there's no way to separate these things out. Because you can be Aboriginal and you can ignore the academy, you can ignore the science, you can ignore the extractive work of business, science, government, all these things on your life. But you're still in it. This is impacting you every day. This is taking things from you every day. So, there's no problem walking. I mean, everybody has to walk in all those worlds, whether they like it or not. And many stumble. So you can either face that reality and accept it and dive in and try and find some corner that you can apply your specialist knowledge, and your relationships and all your family and kin knowledge. And you can apply that there to try and give other people an easier passage, or you can just lie down and get crushed by it like a big steamroller. Big steamroller with a big Captain Cook sitting at the wheel or something,
Well,
and do you see anything moving in the academia, more openness to other ways of seeing or being in the world or knowing? Is that happening, or it's...
There is the will, and, our allies are as frustrated as we are, and we have as many allies as enemies, but in the end, we're hampered by the algorithms of the Enlightenment, the stuff that's like built in right from day one of the rights of man and all that kind of thing. There are limitations. And I suppose we can get into that in more depth, but I guess that started out with, in France, when they were first deciding about what the rights of man are, the first human rights sort of business, they had a big debate over whether or not Jewish people could have human rights. And the compromise that they landed on in the end was that Jewish individuals could have human rights, but not Jewish communities. And I guess that's the same now. If we start getting into, identity, things move in terms of individuals may be compensated or have allowances made for them on a case-by-case basis, and there may be friendships, partnerships, collaborations, with individuals or, isolated groups of people, but not Indigenous communities. Our identities aren't individualized identities, but we can only access the benefits of equality and human rights. We can only access that as individuals. So therefore, our identities have to shift into individualized identities. And it's at that moment that we become assimilated, and we start, broadcasting, projecting, signaling our fabulous intersectionalities and our, there is social capital to be had in very limited ways, but it's there anyway. We're all these fabulous individuals out there kind of, leveraging these individualized Indigenous identities into a kind of social capital that we can use to gamble on a social futures market. We can speculate, with these things and try to leverage some social mobility from that. So we have a middle class, a very vibrant and large middle class now in Aboriginal Australia. And our role is to redecorate the colony in a post-colonial style. So nothing structural allowed, but, lots of posters on the wall, lots of boomerangs in glass cases, lots of assertions of sovereignty and declarations about racism and everything else that people really support us in, but they can't really help us at that individual level. We can make friends, but we can't reconcile with our histories and the different cultures that are here. It's a tricky world.
Very tricky. We met a young filmmaker in Australia while we were there, and he is also a performer of cultural dance. And he says, when I'm on stage, everybody worship me and they look at us like gods. And then as soon as I leave the stage, I'm treated like I'm a criminal, or I'm not allowed to fish in the traditional rivers where my ancestors, I can't fish because of preservation. Right. So,
our identities are group identities.
Right.
Your identity, you don't have an individual identity. You have a group identity. It's with your kin, both human and non-human, and the places that are yours, that you're connected to or affiliated with. This is your identity, but when you're in that identity, you don't have rights. But when you step out of that identity into an individualized sort of package of, advantages, disadvantages, privileges, non-privileges. When you step into this, the minute you step into that, you're an individual, and then you have rights, But for us, an identity is a group identity. And, I say that as though that's not true for every human being. It is true. Like, human identities are group identities. Human ethnicities are, group identities. Everybody has these. This is how we are hardwired as a species, and everybody's just branding themselves because they have to survive, and then we just try and make do as best we can under the very bad bosses that we labor beneath. Trying to bring some, bring some kind of unique skill set whereby we can add value to their capital, and that's pretty much what we do, all of us.
To continue on the identity topic, I was let's see if I can formulate. So, non-duality, we grabbed that from the Eastern traditions of Buddhism and Advaita, and applied it in our own way to the Western world. But in essence, it's about deconstructing identity, the sense of self, individual, the sense of I. But in the process of bringing it to the West, we stumbled into something about like spiritual bypassing, right? So that's very predominant because I think of the extraction process, perhaps, maybe, I don't know. I don't have a theory of that. On the other hand, identity is important. And I think a lot of Western white people have lost that kind of identity as a group, as a belonging to a long lineage of beings, and then we've stumbled into the whole politics of identity, where now is dividing our society. I
don't believe that this idea of the West having lost its identity. What it has is a whole heap of disinformation, deliberate disinformation about the past and their identities that's there to service the needs of the powerful. and to create this privileged group that will, do anything to ensure that the current system stays in place. I don't believe the Western people have lost their identity. I believe that it's just been muddied by a whole heap of disinformation and false stories. So, particularly, references to a golden age or a past that could be 50 years ago or, 1,000 years ago. But there are all these references to a tradition, a long tradition, which is usually a lie. It's usually a wrong story made up. But to give people a sense that they've lost something and that they're losing something, so that every time they see, somebody, a non-Western person doing okay, that somehow that's taken something from them, So Western culture has been deliberately manipulated into becoming a culture of grievance, a culture of a sense of loss, a sense of, I have lost, my privileges, my rights. There are all these marauding Visigoths, descending on Rome to take, what's left. And now we must fight, and there's the way that Christian identities particularly have been manipulated in order to mobilize people at the local level, state level, federal level, to mobilize these populations to form a very passionate, angry base, a mob, people who, a certain percentage of them, if you get the right messaging right, that they will be prepared to do street violence, and that they can be directed with dog whistles and vague messages towards certain minority groups, etc., to do violence. And then a small percentage of those will be happy to pick up a rifle and storm into a nightclub or a school, or a government building. So, I don't believe the West has lost its culture. I believe like every other culture, it's every other arbitrary delineation of a culture or an ethnicity, that there's a lot of diversity in there. There are a lot of diverse traditions in there. And there's just been this big basket that's been created, that includes a lineage going back to ancient Greeks, but refuses to admit modern Greeks into the, you know what I mean? I don't know how Socrates gets claimed by the West, but, my mate Constantine down the road, he's not welcome because he's too brown, Maurizio, your people weren't welcome bloody 50 years ago.
Right, it's true.
Yeah, and it's man, and this is a, I don't know. I've always wanted, ever since I saw that last Thor movie. Did you see Love and Thunder?
No.
Okay. So Russell Crowe is playing Zeus. The god Zeus. And he's doing an accent which I think international audiences would not pick up as really offensive. The accent that he's doing, it's not an actual Greek accent, but it's an accent that that boomers and the silent generation used to use to make fun of Mediterranean immigrants. It's like this exaggerated, it's like
give us an impression. Come on.
So back in the I can't do it. I just can't do it. It hurts me. To do it because I know, there were things like we had things like the Kalgoorlie riots in Australia where people, where big white angry mobs would storm down the street and smash all the Italian businesses and would assault and kill Italian people, Italian immigrants. It's not that long ago. That's just a few decades ago. We had riots just like a couple of decades ago. That was like just this big race war of, white people in Sydney getting Southern Cross tattoos on themselves, and that became the swastika, and then they were just after all the brown people. They were after the, Middle Eastern and, Greek, Italian, etc., migrants. Really, really terrible stuff. So it really hit me when I heard him doing this accent. And I haven't heard anybody sort of call him out on it. it's just like, oh my God, they're going to let him keep doing it because these international audiences, they don't understand what that accent means. It's like a deliberate insult. But then I see, like, he just keeps going, because then he does The Pope's Exorcist, this movie recently where he plays like a Roman Catholic priest, you know, in Italy, who works for the Vatican as an exorcist. And he's doing it again.
Oh, the same one. Maybe it's one of the few you know.
It's actually better because it's a serious movie and not a superhero movie. You can see that he actually had some dialect coaching. And when he's speaking Italian, it's pretty good Italian he's speaking.
Check him out.
It's almost believable. Like he can still, you can still hear that twang in there. But, you know, anyway, it's a terrible movie. It's like trying to excuse the Spanish Inquisition as like, no, that wasn't the church. That was demons who took over. That was demons who possessed like high level people in the church, and they did the Inquisition. We didn't do it. You know, and I guess that brings us back to this whole idea of the West constantly rewriting its own histories, you know. Yeah. And we can get into that. You know, there's a lot of logical fallacies that are deployed there, and I've been interested in logical fallacies lately.
You want to share one of those you've been wrestling with?
Good with those. Oh God, yeah.
Oh my God. They're all based on stuff that happened in the playground when you're at school, when you're a kid, you know. Some kid would be grabbing your arms and smashing your face with them and go, stop hitting yourself, or you know, like if you call out someone's bad behavior or bullying or something, then they go, like, you are, you know, I know you are, but what am I? Like, you know, no, I'm not doing that, you're doing that. Like they just flip it around. They're the like basic ones. And that's that one's called tu quoque. I don't know how to say the Latin. I don't think anybody does. Maybe in the Vatican they do. I don't know. But they've all got Latin names, these ones. But that one's like, you know, to escape accountability, you just flip the whole thing around and reverse it and put it back on the other person. It's no, that's not me. That's you. You know, so yeah, if you want like a really good like introduction to logical fallacies, just type in Donald Trump and press play, because he does them all. And there's another one that I saw. The one I'm talking about with the Pope's Exorcist with the Russell Crowe thing. I can't remember what it's called, but it's like, well, if Y follows X, then therefore X caused Y.
Whoa.
You know what I mean? And that's a logical fallacy, because it doesn't necessarily follow that, you know, just because this preceded it doesn't mean that that's what caused it, you know. I'm a bit doopy this morning, so I can't remember exactly what that one was called, but it's got a Latin name. These all have Latin names. to give
it weight and reasoning, right?
Yeah.
Must be true.
Yeah. And I've just written this whole thing. I've done so I got another book coming out in October, but then I got another one coming out later this year where I'm like in dialogue with spiritual like thought leaders from all around the world. And so they're all writing a chapter responding from their faith to the book Sand Talk that I wrote in 2019. And then I write a chapter responding to that. And I've chosen to go through and follow the themes of these, you know, logical fallacies. And I'm pointing out all the logical fallacies that I deployed in Sand Talk, unwittingly, but that makes it vast quantities of that book are just are rubbish logic. You know, you lean on these logical fallacies if you haven't got good facts, or you haven't got, you know, a decent argument, or you're too lazy to make a decent argument. So like there's one called the argumentum ad fastidium, and that's where you just you express disgust about something, and that's enough. That thing's bad because it's disgusting. I find it disgusting. So that's it. That's your whole argument. Finished.
And fastidio basically mean until you are fed up. Fastidio. You can't stand until you can't stand it anymore. Until you are fed up. Yeah.
The biggest one that I use is the argumentum ad antiquitum.
Ad antiquitum.
So the appeal to tradition.
If it's somebody told the 600 years ago.
If it has a long tradition, if it has a long tradition behind it, then it must be good.
Must be true.
If people have been doing it forever, then it must be right. So that's like half of my, you know what I mean? And that's, it's often true, but you need to do more. Like you can't just present an idea from Aboriginal culture and then say, well, it's old, so it's good. Because that's just the ancient wisdom grift. Like it's definitely a grift. It's a guru making, cult making kind of grift. This idea of, we have ancient wisdom, and then people are like, show me the ancient wisdom. You know what I mean? It's like, well, it's very secret, but I'll give you.
And I take
you know what
cards.
I mean? Yeah, that's it, man. There's heaps of it. I didn't even know I was doing it in Santor until I was reading it in the sound booth for the audio book, and I'm reading it aloud to myself, not to myself, but to the microphone, and I'm going, okay, I heard it that time. Okay, but there's another one that's just about false binaries, false dichotomies. I can't remember the Latin. But, and this is important for the non-duality theme. You set up these false binaries, like between good and evil. I do it all the time in Sand Talk. I even do a good and evil bit, that complexity is good and simplicity is evil kind of thing. And that's just not how anything works in any culture, in nature, in physics, in anything. Nothing works like that. There's never these two polar opposites that, on a continuum. And there's certainly not, and another fallacy that comes out of that is this third way thing, the idea that the central point between two opposite points of view must be the truth. So that's that twisted Hegelian idea of, there's a synthesis between opposites and that's the right place to stand. And you see it in politics all the time, people claiming a centrist point of view that must be good. Both sides hate me, so I must be right. And it's like, no, bros. That doesn't make you right. A proper argument makes you right. A proper set of relationships in the world that's informing your decision-making, and that you're doing with other people, that would make you right. But yeah, just existing between two opposite points of view doesn't make you right. And it's another fallacy right there. Yeah.
Beautiful.
So if you're trying to escape non-duality, if you're trying to escape duality, by assuming that non-duality is the point in between the dualisms, then no, that's you are right deep in the anus of duality there.
But I wrote 6 books about it.
But that's the issue with the way we take in some deep understandings from those traditions and make them into a thing that we can understand with our rational, logic, Western mindset. And
there's
non-duality lives in every indigenous community. I mean, every indigenous teaching, but it's not a thing. It's not described. It's right. It's embodied. It's lived. It's constantly moving, evolving, shifting, changing. You can't say this is it.
Yeah. The moment you mention it, you went out of it, basically. But
it's not a lawless process. In indigenous cultures, the cultural exchange is intensely rule governed. And every exchange is deeply considered, carefully considered before changes are accepted. So the idea of hybridity or of this secular aesthetic of pastiche. So the idea of pastiche, it's just like, the melting pot, all these cultures just ping around randomly and then, in chaos, and then something beautiful emerges, which is this hybridized, lovely, centrist kind of third way amazing culture emerges. No. You're going to have a mess if that happens. You're going to have problems if that happens. So secularism is an interesting thing. So secular being, the non-spiritual, the rational, etc. It's one of those. It's this double standard fallacy thing. This idea that the empires, when they came into the southern hemisphere, that they exported secularism, they imposed secularism, on the governance of their colonies, while and touted that as being rational and part of the Enlightenment, but at the same time they had basically theocracies operating back in the motherland still, and they still do today. So to a large extent, the UK is sort of masquerading as secular, but it's very theocratic, but they kind of have these demands on the lands and peoples that they take over to make them secular, at the same time as sending missionaries to convert them. But the governance, the science, everything else is supposed to be secular, and a separation of church and state. And so a big part, secularism is really characterized by that notion of pastiche, that idea that there is, if you throw all these cultures together, then this hybridized new thing will emerge, that will be perfect, as if by magic. It's the same thinking as the invisible hand of the marketplace. All these random consumers just behaving erratically, that it forms in the aggregate a big, wisdom of the crowd that's going to select for the most optimal path through, that the market will solve everything. It's the same logic, the same thinking, that pastiche that's not rule governed will somehow give rise to something perfect. It does not, and they knew this, and they know this. They know that what it gives rise to is actually just assimilation. They end up with a big population that basically shares a common kind of wisdom, a common set of ideals that makes them more manipulable, more easily controlled as one big nation. That can be manipulated into accepting an economic system, accepting systems of labor, et cetera, irrationally feeling, a patriotic kind of, belonging, to a nation. And that idea of a nation, that's only a century old. That's a new system that was brought in to make the industrial era work, to make sure that people could be, conscripted into standing armies and armies of factory workers as well, and all the rest, the industrialization of labor and of society, etc. And that was only a century ago. So I'm not going to let Western people off the hook saying that they've lost their culture. It was only a century ago that everyone was moved into this. And 50 years ago, most people still lived on the land in the West. Most people still had farms. And if they didn't have a farm, they had a very large backyard. Even in Melbourne, you can still see, in these gentrified suburbs, in a lot of the backyards, you can still see the remains of old pigsties and chicken pens. Everybody kept chickens. Everybody kept pigs. Everybody had veggie gardens. It's only recently people stopped being connected to the soil, to our detriment as a species. Huh?
Yeah. But, in New Zealand, let's say, we've met people who know their lineage for 13 generations, the name of grandmother, grandfather. I haven't met anyone, at least here in the US, in Turtle Island, that knows more than two generations before and what happened to them. And so I'm hinting on that kind of identity, lineage-based identity, knowing what happened to the ancestors that informs who we are today and what we do today. And that I'm curious to know your take. We released 2 years ago, the movie The Wisdom of Trauma, which now, reflecting back from what we know today, has a very much this kind of Western individualistic, psychotherapeutic based lens through which we see trauma, right? And as we are exploring now trauma through the lens of intergenerational ancestral wounding, the way we understand trauma has changed dramatically.
Well, I mean, you're both like, you'd be called Western, and you have to interact with the Western marketplace.
Wouldn't be called
so
Western.
you have to repackage things through that. But like people would call you Western, but the fact is, you both come from cultures where lineage is important. Where your town, you know what I mean? Your place is important, and your family and extended family and all your ancestors, and then your town, and then your region and your regional dialect. That is an important part of your identity. You have these orbits of identity as you go out into the world. And as you interact with the world in the outer orbits, you have to change you have to code switch, and you both code switch well into that outer orbit that you have to, when you interact with that marketplace, in the orbit that's furthest from home, you have to repackage your stuff into some marketable form. And that's fair enough, but I bet that's not, if you're sitting down with your nonna and she's talking about curses and stuff, that's like, you're not in that mindset anymore. You're there, and she's talking about the great grandmother, De Fabio or whatever, who, had a castle and, all the rest. She's talking about bloody, parents hanging out with Garibaldi and doing amazing stuff. Yeah, it's a whole different thing. It's your cultures, I don't know, especially like I was saying before with the Russell Crowe stuff, Italy has only recently been included in the basket of whiteness, and that's just because they're not breeding fast enough. The people who call themselves white aren't breeding fast enough, so they have to keep inviting other people in and making them white. It doesn't make you white. Anyway.
On that level, yes, but they are the oldest empire, right? They've carried the colonial mindset for the longest. So I'm just talking in terms of disconnect that we've had for so many generations from land, from spirit, from the pagan traditions were wiped, basically erased by the church
thousands of years ago.
That kind
but
of
there's still this one.
Identity.
Knock on wood. They still do knock on wood. Have you heard that?
We do. Yeah, we do.
Anglo people who supposedly have no pagan traditions,
right.
They still like it if, to ward off against bad luck and curses of saying something bad that might happen. They knock on, or hoping for something, they knock on wood. It's still there. It has to be wood because you've got to connect with the wood. You look into 1,000 little things that people do. There's, people are still like, if they're spilling salt, throwing it over their left shoulder or whatever, people from Generation X and the boomers, they're still keeping the wishbone off the chicken and drying it out on the windowsill above the sink and then snapping it to make a wish. They're doing 1,000 things. They're blowing out candles on a freaking cake. Do you know what that means? These are all pagan traditions coming down. They're using every time you say it's Thursday today, pagan, everything is pagan.
You're freaking me out because I feel, as I was saying, I feel such a loss when I go back in my culture. I feel like, there is nothing. I wish more culture. And now you're mentioning things that are, obviously you're not on wood. That's not, but you're saying something, you're making me face the obvious that it's so obvious that I don't see it. Thank you. I mean, it's beautiful. And I want to start to explore these little things.
I went to Italy. Looking for culture. You never see your own. My culture's just normal for me.
No, we went to Australia to look for culture.
I know. I went to Italy looking for culture, and I found it. If you're being hosted in someone else's culture, you learn so much and you see things that they don't even see. I'm hanging out in Assisi and I'm sitting just with wonder at the fountain. That's a spring, it's a sacred spring that's been a sacred spring for 10,000 years in that place. And people have gathered around it and they're still gathering around it because it's in the square, I'm there and I'm seeing all these saints who are just, they're just the same old pagan entities that have been there forever, but they're just wearing different robes now. And I felt it deep, really deep. And I went out with the hunters who were hunting wild boar. I'm talking to people who are speaking in dialects that are just so far removed from standard Italian. You know what I mean? They're carrying through, it's their region. The land is still shaping the language, in these ancient ways. I'm seeing all this stuff there in Italy and it blew my mind. So I've always been fascinated with Italy in that way, that it manages to be so modern, but it's still got feet grounded firmly in the past. And Italian Australians are people I always want to hang out with, because there's not one Italian family I know who isn't profoundly connected to the soil and the earth and the ground. There's not one Italian family I know here who doesn't do seasonal activities of harvesting the tomatoes they grow, making the passata, and that they all have like a shed where they make their sausage. Yeah. See? It's like, that's my culture. I don't have any culture there. That's the offensive accent. I don't have any culture. I lost my culture. I want to be connected to the land. I want to be connected to the land. Hey, bring me that sausage. Making wine, making their own wine, making grappa. The amount of brain cells I've lost from drinking grappa, like homemade grappa with Italians, I tell you. It's probably half my problems is drinking with Italians.
I like to participate in your problem.
Yeah. Look, the main message I wanted to get across in Sand Talk and failed was like, don't be looking to my culture for ancient wisdom. It's just like, just notice your own. Notice your own culture. It's pretty, there's stuff there, and there's stuff there that's solid and that the powerful haven't got their claws into yet and twisted on you. There is good story there. Drink from it. It's there. There's right story.
That's a beautiful invitation. Yeah. Yeah, in a way, that's how we perpetuate the colonial mindset that something out there is better than what we've got, right? We need more of that. It's more spiritual, it's more connected, it's more relational. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be dissatisfied with what you have, and you have to crave something else constantly. And then you need upgrades all the time because you're like a dream catcher and eagle feather fan or something that you bought. And, that's after a few months, you're like, well, I'm not catching any dreams there. And this fan's just, I'm bored with this fan now. I think I'm going to look for some crystals, or whatever. Yeah.
That is the spiritual consumerism that we immerse in.
That's it. And that brings it back to the bypass that you were talking about before. That spiritual bypass. But, all of us do it. Like I say in Sand Talk, it's just full of, ancient wisdom grift, like, packed to the rafters. And it's very hard to speak in English or write in English without doing some form of that, without your discourse being co-opted into something that serves the economy. If your book is capable of being published, then it's probably got some evil stuff in it that's serving the marketplace, and you got to let yourself off the hook on that individually. This brings us back to the identity thing. You don't have an individual identity, you have a group identity. So, things like that you have to do as an individual to survive, that does not define your group identity. That does not define your culture and your family and everything else. That's just the things that we all have to do to survive. So that authenticity that everybody's looking for, usually it's an extractive thing, but the authenticity is there. Everybody has it. It's always running through, and there's always continuity. going back through, even if your family's ended up absorbing that many cultures, there is a through line that goes through, and that's your tradition, and it is authentic, and it's there. It's just, it just may not be marketable or packageable as an authenticity sort of product.
Wow. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you, Bev.
Thank you, Bev. Thank you, Tyson, so much for this time. And sorry we couldn't take all the questions.
Sorry.
We'll continue this conversation. This continues one way or another.
Yeah. So I fear it's time to close. And really, we can only thank each and every one of you.
Thank you for this rich conversation, Tyson, and for your sharing vulnerability, darkness, all of it, because that's human, that's authentic if we need to put a label.
Right.
So thank you for giving us permission.
Yeah.
It's
so refreshing to hear you. So refreshing. I'm deeply touched by the way you, I always loved your work, but now in this conversation, you had a notch to what I thought it was impossible to beat. I adore you, man. You're awesome. Thank you.
And thank you for listening to The Sounds of Sand. We invite you to explore more of our talks, dialogues, videos, articles, events, and offerings through our website, scienceandnonduality.com. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please consider becoming a member to access our massive library of SAND content, available exclusively to SAND members. And we would love it if you could leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Google, and Spotify. And share this episode with your family, friends, and all sentient beings. Be well.